And now it gives me great pleasure to introduce and welcome our alumnus, Mike Smith, class of 1960.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
My classmate over here, Rich Hordak, we were classmates and in the same class for 3 years. It's great to be here. It's in my hometown, and actually my offices are 3 blocks from here. I live on the Upper East Side. All my children are grown, and I've got 7 grandkids now. It's amazing. And Father, thank you so much. And this is, quite frankly, thinking about this and what I would talk about today, because I did have this conversation with Larry and Rory, and to the group, not to make sure that whatever I said was the appropriate thing. So actually my message is personal, basically, and then I certainly would welcome any questions. The law that the Father just mentioned has been maligned from time to time. That was the repeal of the Glass-Steagall Act. However, I'll mention that just briefly, my observation on what happened, which gave rise to the crisis we've just been through, and the fact that we now have a new law called the Dodd-Frank Act, which is 2,200 and some odd pages and 25,000 pages of regulations. So we've kind of gone back to where we started. But just a couple of personal observations, just on the comments the Father made. The cafeteria, I'll never forget the cafeteria. Also, I would never forget the lounge. The seniors had a smoking lounge. Can you believe that? Mayor Bloomberg did not go to Fairfield Prep. That was quite amazing. I never took that in, but I know that was very popular at the time. I remember going to alumni football dinner or whatever it was, and had a chance in that cafeteria to shake hands with Bob Skoronsky. I don't know if you know this, many of you, some of you do, maybe all of you do. But Bob Skoronsky went to Fairfield Prep, and he was our speaker that day, and that was a big deal. It was the 1960s, and all I can remember is when he shook my hand, his fingers went up to my elbow, but he was the captain of the NYBA Packers during their championship seasons with Vince Lombardi, so it was quite exciting and also daunting. I actually played against some of those Bob Skoronsky types, and actually had a couple on my team who hit harder, I might say, than some of the players on the other teams we played. Our practices I'll talk about in a minute. But I remember in 1969 we had a blackout. A lot of people, there was a movie about it, and I guess the most number of births were 9 months later in the history of the United States. But it was all over the East Coast, and we were in the locker room when the blackout occurred, actually just cleaning up after practice, and it was very difficult because you couldn't obviously see anything, you couldn't get your clothes on. But one of our innovative members had a motorcycle, brought the motorcycle in, turned the motorcycle on, and lit up the whole locker room. And that was, I'll never forget that. And also, too, I was mentioning to Rich just a minute ago that this is our anniversary. We graduated on June 5th, 1967. And actually, Rich was, I think he was our valedictorian. Am I right, Rich? So, anyway. Don't want to embarrass Rich, but good to see that. Now, public speaking, I want you to know, I learned this at Fairfield Prep. It is a learned thing. It's not, and one of the things you learn is you don't put paper clips in your remarks, but anyway. Seeing as I'm just going to wing it for you. I was taken aback in thinking about what I would say to you this morning, reflecting on a special series that CNN has just started on the 60s, dedicated to the 60s. And I thought that was a stimulant for what I would say to you today. And try to make it as interesting and in its own way personal. I could always talk to you about banking. However, I think it's probably a little too early. You need at least 3 cups of coffee, or maybe even something stronger, the way things have been going recently. But I certainly would delve into any topics you want to discuss in that arena. The 60s, to me, started with, and to all of us who were there, started with so much promise. It was an exciting time for a young man who had just moved to the East Coast from Indiana. The first order of business was for my Irish mother to find a good parochial school for her two sons, and she did. And it was one of the, probably one of the constants in my life, in my brother's life. And as we moved from the Midwest to the East, which by the way was quite an experience, we went to one of the only parochial schools in the county in Indiana that existed, and just coincidentally its name was St. Patrick's. Our other constant was sports. I only knew three when I moved. That was baseball, football, and basketball. There really were no other sports in those days, at least to me. Parochial schools were not a good breeding ground for sports unless you like to play on asphalt and to tear your knees out, knees out of your pants, that is, on the asphalt. The other great thing at the start of this special decade was the music. Listening to transistor radios, playing with the rabbit ears on top of the TV. It was such an innocent time, and soon that time would end, and quite frankly, none of us have been innocent since. In the spring of 1963, I nervously took my entrance into Fairfield Prep. I was accompanied by a number of my friends. It was my first real exposure to the world of testing. Doesn't that make you? My only observation that is such a torturous but I know necessary way to determine someone's fitness to advance in higher education. The letter came and I was admitted, and some of my friends were not, and this was sad. In September of '73, I went off to a railroad station to take a 40-minute trip to Fairfield. Immediately I thought, this isn't going to be easy. McAuliffe Hall was full of, all I can remember of those days, the smell of coffee. And all those innocent young men with their buzz cuts, or burr cuts, call them what you will, and ties. And so my career started at the ripe age of 14. I knew when I saw the quiz pad and 2 hours of Latin a day that this place was serious. The end of innocence for many of us, certainly for me, was November 22nd, 1963. While sitting in an afternoon class, we were notified over the PA that President Kennedy had been shot. Everything stopped, including class, football practice. The silence was what I remember most about that day. For the next 4 days, there were no smiles, there were no jokes. Things would never be the same. For the young men and women, John Kennedy was a symbol of everything we wanted to be. He reflected the soaring spirit of the 60s. And now what? Well, thank God for the Beatles. Thank God for the Rolling Stones. Thank God for the Beach Boys. Thank God for the Four Tops. And thank God for the Temptations. And of course, thank God for Fairfield Prep, for keeping us all in line during one of the most tumultuous times in the history of the country. The Gulf of Tonkin, Vietnam, the 6 Days War, Martin Luther King, Robert Kennedy, and of course Woodstock were some of the highlights, or the lowlights, of the years after the loss of innocence. Where would Fairfield Prep be without its great sports program? I played on the same field where the Giants practiced. They used our lockers. The names of Cabbage, Huff, Connerly, Tittle, Gifford, Summerall, Patton, Lynch, Landry were all on the locker doors. While these were good memories, I really didn't appreciate what they did to our football field. Totally ruined it, you know. And the minute the rain started in the fall, it was just a mud pile. Joe Brosley and Earl Legary were my two coaches. The rigor and discipline of the classroom was easily and seamlessly transferred to the football field. And then, of course, you had to travel home to do 3 hours of homework. My favorite teacher was Father Welch. He taught us Latin, geometry, and English, and he wrote the textbook in Latin. Now, what does that really mean? That means you're in real trouble. Trots were not allowed and actually were considered a variant of cheating. someone in my office, I was talking to them about this experience, and they said, by the way, Mike, what is a trot? I've never heard of such a thing. So I had explained to them. They still have trots, I assume. He's still teaching. If you did not study every night for 3 hours, you are not going to pass. Of course, there is not time to go out. Dating would come sometime after the senior prom. As I graduated, the war in Vietnam was escalating and off to one of the most liberal colleges in America. It had just abolished in loco parentis. And not surprisingly, the end of curfews, combined with a horde of 18-year-olds, could only spell trouble. Again, if it wasn't for the lessons learned at prep, I probably would have been one of the thousands of lost souls on campus during this period. Yes, I did enjoy the college life, but underneath I held on to my faith and what I had learned. And when things were really tough, I thought back to those practices with Earl Avery, or those lessons learned from Father Welch. I always recalled our games on Saturday were a relief from the rigors of the weekday studies and workouts. And of course, the war would be waged for another 4 years after my graduation, and I would go to Washington, where I would witness firsthand the workings of the White House under Nixon, his demise at Watergate, and the continued loss of the spirit which Kennedy had brought to so many of his generation, of our generation. Fast forward to today. My professional career has had 2 stops, one working for a congressman in Washington for 4 years, the other for the banking industry, which has spanned nearly 4 decades. I was happily married and raising 5 children when my wife died from cancer, and I had another full-time career as a single parent. The most important lesson I learned, and I just pass this along, it's my only simple commentary in that period, is don't underestimate your capacity to do what you have to do when you're faced with challenges. Going back to my years of prep and using an old football analogy, it really is all about blocking and tackling. You have to do the basic stuff right, because there's going to come a time when the long ball, the big deal, or your best friend and advisor will not be there. This is particularly true in the banking world, and the lessons learned from the financial crisis which we have all gone through, and hopefully have come to the other side. The basic business of banking, since the beginning of time, has been all about blocking and tackling, taking deposits, and making loans. This is the traditional job of banking. Now, obviously, there's a lot more to it if you want to get technical about, underwriting and risk assessment and everything else, but that's the basics. The most risky forms of finance were pretty well isolated within the domain of investment banking. The wall separating these 2 businesses began to crack in the 80s and fell completely in the 90s. While the feast lasted, everyone shared in the wealth, including those, unfortunately, and it's reflective of society, reflective of a lot of factors, those who could not afford to purchase a home. Unfortunately, when the government opened up these markets, and we had argued at the time, it failed to reorganize the referees in the financial marketplace. And the referees in this case are the regulatory agencies. They made these big changes, and because of government and the way they view things and the bureaucracy, they didn't change these regulatory agencies, and because of that, there were major gaps in oversight and regulation of the financial markets, which in my estimation gave rise to many of the problems we confront. Well, I don't have to tell you what we have today. The markets have been chastened, for sure, and the return to basics has become the rule of the day. It's changed forever, and if you look back at what happened in the Great Depression in the 30s, it was literally 60 or 70 years after those laws were passed that they were changed. So what we have today is what we're probably going to have for some time. The tragedy of all this is the cause of the crisis. Unfortunately, there was a very simple cause in my estimation. It was caused by a systematic and collective breakdown of ethics and morality on the part of some of those involved. And I do say some. It is extraordinarily hurtful to see that, as it would be if you're a lawyer or a doctor, or whatever your profession is, accounting, that the whole industry would take a hit. That's the way it works. It's all about, in my estimation, knowing right from wrong, which would have prevented so much of the suffering that has come. Watching my own children grow, I have every hope in the successors, and Rich and I were talking about this earlier. I have every hope in the successive generations and the way they go about conducting their lives. As for my generation, I think something happened back there, as I mentioned at the outset, that something happened back there in the 60s. Maybe if there were more schools like Prep, the story would have been different, and I really mean that. Fortunately, we still have Prep today as a beacon of hope for all the coming generations. It is my honor to be a graduate of Fairfield Prep. I do feel that the 4 years I was there, commuting, having all my colleagues and friends, and I did go there, my brother went there 2 years ago, changed the whole structure of my life. It taught me how to do what I have to do and be serious about it. And I just close on one note. A friend of mine went to Jesuit High School, Loyola, and he told me he held the record in terms of jug. Permanent jug. And so I said, Mikey, I said, I really don't, I know all about this jug, but he goes, don't you know what it means? Justice under God. And I really, for all the years I went to Prep, I didn't even know what that jug meant that way. Thank you very much, and I'd be more than happy if you have any questions. Those are my reflections.
Thank you.